1, 2, 3.
This is a special extended interview from Laura Flanders and friends released ahead of our upcoming podcast of our special report on the impact of the petrochemical industry in Louisiana 20 years after Hurricane Katrina. In this conversation, we hear from General Russel Honoré, the retired lieutenant general who led federal recovery efforts after Katrina and now heads the GreenArmy, a grassroots environmental alliance. Since the Trump administration returned to office in 2025, there's been a sharp increase in federally approved LNG export plants in Louisiana. An expansion Honoré warns is accelerating coastal collapse and tightening corporate control over state politics. In this timely and unfiltered interview, he speaks frankly about climate denial, government failure, and the erosion of democracy in a region already under extreme pressure. For General Honoré, real resilience means confronting both corruption and the fossil fuel industry head on.
General Honoré, thank you so much for joining us and spending some time with us today. If I could start by just asking you to tell us who you are and how do you want to be identified?
Well, I'm Russel Honoré, Lieutenant General, United States Army, retired, and most people just call me General.
I'll do that if I may. General, the last time you and I spoke was 10 years after Hurricane Katrina. When you look back at that hurricane, what stands out in your mind from those days 20 years ago?
Well, a lot of changes have been made in the government and how we respond to hurricanes. A lot of infrastructure has been improved. The above-ground infrastructure in and around the Gulf Coast with the hurricane protection system that was put in around New Orleans. And yet there's still challenges because the bottom line, Mother Nature can break anything built by man. You build a 21-foot levee, you get a 22-foot flood, either from rain or from surge from the storms. But a lot of improvements have been made to make specifically the city of New Orleans and the surrounding communities more resilient. And that's promising. We're putting in some levee systems, minor levee systems along the north shore of La Place, which flooded during the last storm, Ida, in 21, and that's going to help them. But a lot of improvements were made. The biggest work still need to be done is what you don't see. Improvements to the water system, the pipes in the city still are aged. They lose about 25% of the water the city cleans for the population is lost through broken pipes. But we're challenged with drinking water across the country, so it's a challenge. And then over the last year, we had a problem with river levels in the Mississippi River south of New Orleans, and we had something called salt water intrusion. Again, that was kind of influenced by some man-made projects because the politicians wanted the Corps engineers to lower the river passage so bigger ships could come into the port of New Orleans. And when they did that, it allowed a saltwater intrusion to happen, which was quite terrifying to the people because, you know, the storm comes, it's over with, but if you lose your drinking water source, that's a different problem. So a lot has been done, but yet much has to be done.
There were missteps that were named about after the hurricane, missteps in the years and even weeks leading up to the hurricane that were named at that time. One of them was the reorganization of authority, the putting of FEMA under the Department of Homeland Security. Another was media misrepresentation of what was happening and manipulation to the point where people didn't really appreciate the threat of climate change. There were many. I don't know if you would like to name any of those, but have those been addressed in your view?
No, but there's big changes coming to FEMA. One of them is to destroy it and get rid of it and leave all the responsibility with the states, which I do not agree with. And at the time we developed the Department of Homeland Security, I was commander of Joint Task Force Homeland Security for Joint Forces Command. This is precursor to Northern Command. And we've had opportunity to comment on that. My headquarters had been established after 9/11, that we needed a military headquarters to basically work Homeland Security in conjunction with the federal agencies. And our comment was leave FEMA under the White House. We thought it would get lost in the Department of Homeland Security. Secretary Ridge at the time, and everybody was excited about it. President Bush, they always excited about doing it that way. To end up with a common picture. So we ended up with Department of Homeland Security. We consolidated intelligence under the Department of Intelligence Agency. And we feared what would happen is FEMA would get lost in DHS.
Yeah.
Because DHS, just by its name, the job is to prevent another 9/11. So they consolidated all of the protectors over there, Coast Guard, Secret Service, Customs and Border Patrol, all under Department of Homeland Security, to make sure we had a coordinated, common picture of the threat. And then you put FEMA. You know, when you put these guys together, I refer to FEMA as like a Saint Bernard that comes up and give you a hug and said, okay, let me rescue you. Whereas the rest of these folks, they have a different mentality. Their job is to protect. So you got the Dobermans and the German Shepherds over here, and FEMA is mixed in with that crowd. It doesn't sync well. It never synced well. And I think we have an opportunity, if the White House listen, and just relook at FEMA. Don't destroy it, fix it. Bring it back under the White House. Properly resource it. Hire the right people. We've got a lot of experienced people. When FEMA first went over to DHS, there were a lot of retired military. Then, as the Department of Homeland Security got established, in my humble opinion, people could go get a degree in emergency management. And then they could get master degrees. So you got people come right out of college. They got their degree in emergency management. They got their master's degree from some very notable university. And they put their hand up, they went to work at FEMA. What happened over time, if you look at a picture of the FEMA work group now, you used to see a lot of retired majors and lieutenant colonels in there who understood logistics, who understood see first, understand first, act first. And we ended up with people with strong academic backgrounds and with a strong adherence to the rules that they put in FEMA, but with very little experience. So I think that changed FEMA. And the other thing changed FEMA is they put a lot of emphasis on search and rescue teams, which are good. And they gave a lot of money to buy fire trucks, which is good, and police cars, grants. Well, when you look at the Stafford Act, which is the money that authorized that FEMA spends under the Stafford Act, it was created to get people back in their homes.
Yeah.
And as we've had more storms, the expectations of what happened goes up. In 2023, the storm year, FEMA allowed about $1.2 billion to get people in their home, but $12 billion fixing infrastructure. Gyms, courthouses, roads, etc. So the money that go to people home, they call that individual assistance. That's driven by people going through what I call a living hell, trying to go through recovery after you lose your home or you lose your roof. The rest of the money is pushed by senators and congressmen to say, hey, I want this gym rebuilt. I want this courthouse rebuilt. So after the storm, you hear very few congressmen or senators yelling about FEMA or governors, because the big money is going to come not in getting people back in their homes, but rebuilding infrastructure. Now, it's clear to me, I know we got to count and balance the budget. We could not continue to spend the amount of money we're spending on rebuilding public infrastructure. Because guess what, Lauren? They don't even insure it now, public infrastructure, because they know they'll be able to get sugar money from FEMA through the White House. So your schools, your gyms, your courthouses, your parks, none of that is insured, or it's underinsured. So people are depending after a storm, whether it's a flood, fire, or hurricane, for FEMA to actually rebuild their infrastructure. And it's a rebuilding program as opposed to what it was intended for, to get people back in their homes, and that frustrates the hell out of people.
So clearly, there's a lot of lessons that should have been learned after Katrina. Do you think we've learned? Do you think we've learned them?
We've learned good and bad lessons, because what Katrina laid bare open to the administration at the time was, we're going to give them everything they want to rebuild. So rebuild all the hospitals, all the public schools in New Orleans, put in a flood protection system. Because New Orleans is just not a destination for people to party. It's a national security interest to the United States. 43% of our exports go through the port of New Orleans and Baton Rouge. That's a significant. We fought a war over New Orleans and the Mississippi River on our expansion west, because we know the country could not develop without control of the Mississippi River, and the British understood that. So we fought a war over it. And there were many that were said. Some congressmen and senators came and we briefed them. And I won't call their names out because some of them are dead now. But their comments were, why would we want to rebuild this city? It's underwater. Just move the people. But they weren't looking at it from a strategic perspective. 43% of our export on any given day, 50% of the barges in America are in Louisiana, transporting stuff that's leaving. That's the stuff we make money on. We make money on selling grain and selling trucks and selling tractors. That brings the income to our economy. We cannot live as a country signing each other's shoes, as Franklin once said.
So if we survive that hurricane, is Louisiana, is New Orleans, Baton Rouge, do you feel secure that this community is safe now, is protected now, has the protections and the resilience and preparedness that it needs?
We're better off. But in a real disaster, not an inconvenience, it's going to break stuff and it's going to kill people. A real disaster. Are we better prepared? Yes, but you have to remember, when you look at the age demographics, the number of children that were under 5 now that are 25, 20 years later after Katrina, that has no recollection of, and people, we kind of have this atrophy thing. We remember what we remember. And then a lot of the people who experience this are dead now. The adults that were taking care of grandchildren and The other piece of observation when you say, are we prepared? We have better evacuation plans. They communicated well to the parishes and to the communities. But I still fear when we looked at the deaths after Katrina, and I'm just using rough numbers here. I can go back and look at a book, but they're pretty close. The majority of the people that we recovered in their homes that were dead were elderly, disabled, and poor, and in some cases all three. And they were alone. I don't know if we've filled that gap yet. Now, there were things that we did before Katrina that were corrected. Like they went to some elderly people's house with an ambulance to help grandma get in the car, and she couldn't take Fluffy with her, and she wouldn't leave. And those were exceptions. They weren't the general rule. But we had a law back then, which I didn't know until afterwards, that said, hey, you can't take pets in the ambulance with you. Nor would they take pets at the shelters. So the good news, Lauren, the first law to pass after Katrina, the first law, was the pet law. That if you're going to run a shelter and you're going to do an evacuation, you have to take care of the pets.
Well, we learned something.
Yeah.
But forgive me if I'm wrong. I've been hearing you sounding alarms about what is coming this way for at least a few months and a little bit longer.
Yeah.
The storms today look a little different. How so?
They're stronger. Data will show. I'm not making that up. And they come more frequently.
And I'm not just talking about climate storms.
I'm talking about hurricanes, because the Gulf is warmer than it's ever been. When we look at last year, was hotter than the year before. When we had Hurricane Milton and Helene come ashore, that is the hottest the Gulf has ever been. The hottest it has ever been. And when you look at Helene Pacific, am I pronouncing that right? Helene?
I think so.
Helene. When Helene came ashore, right after Milton, it went in through the Florida Gulf Coast, and it crossed Interstate 10 as a Category 2. That hadn't happened many times before. And it charged through Georgia, tearing down electric grids, and it went into North Carolina and flooded the place.
The mountains.
And I'm not going to, one of the things we do in disaster recover, there's no blame on the survivors, because things happen over time. When you look at that great ravine that went up through the mountains, if you had passed there 30 years ago, you'd see the houses sitting on the side of the mountain. Over years, when this became a tourist town, people want the restaurant next to the river for the ambiance. They want the little shops next to the river. But you go back and you look at where a previous generation lived, they had those houses tucked, and you can look at some of the old movies on the side of the hill, because they knew that river was going to flood. Yeah. But, and again, I say that with no sticks thrown at the people who lived there who survived that. And then the response unfolded slowly. We had a lot of volunteers. There's another piece that you can't overstate today, because we've got communications when it's working. We had more volunteer helicopters in there when we had federal helicopters for 10 or 12 days. Because the state plan was to use National Guard helicopters, which do a good job. They came from up north to supplement the state guard helicopters. But we could have been there quicker with more stuff. And
more stuff and more workers.
I was talking to people at the White House. I said, what are y'all doing?
Well, let me go to that question, because now we're talking at a period where we have an administration that is cutting federal workers, cutting disaster relief, and toying at least with abolishing FEMA altogether.
Right.
What kind of danger does that pose?
It's going to expose more people if they go that path, because what I'm hearing coming out of the White House is let the governors handle it. Well, let's look at that storm. So Florida, they can't help nobody because they got dealing with Milton and they deal with the residue from Helena. Then the storm go through Georgia. Georgia can't help the Carolinas. Tennessee got hit, and North Carolina and South Carolina, both of them hit. So the normal, you get help from your neighboring states. So that fixed those capacities, everything from wildlife and fishery and fire departments from helping each other. So it comes to the federal government. Now visualize this. This is Northern Carolina. The flood is right here, coming out of the mountains. Right over here, you got Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the world famous 101st Airborne. Probably got 80 or 90 helicopters there and 15,000 troops that are air assault. They can go anywhere, anytime. Okay? You go over here, here's Fort Bragg. President was there a week ago. Home of the 18th Airborne Corps and the 82nd Airborne with an aviation brigade. Go over here, Fort Stewart, Georgia, and Savannah, home of Special Ops Battalion of Aircraft and the Aviation Brigade for the 3rd Infantry Division. You go over here, here's the Marine Expeditionary Force, 100 helicopters, easy. You go down here to Pensacola, United States Air Force Search and Rescue Team. And I'm saying, what in the fuck is Biden doing? Excuse my language, you can cut that out. What is he doing? Let the federal troops go in. It was on tacit purpose, one of the things troops said on. Let us go, boss. And I think you can go back and check. It took them 14 days before they told the 101st, hey, take 1,000 troops. Then they said 1,400. They should have been there the next day.
And why do you think they weren't?
This is what happened when you get your operators right out of school. And you follow the rules, because the Democrats, they like to follow the rules. The rules is you don't send federal troops unless the governor asks for it. So you're on the eve of an election, and you expect the governor to say, hey, send me some more troops, send me some more helicopters. It didn't happen.
Even though it's a Democratic governor.
I mean, it's falling apart on television. FEMA's overwhelmed. You got volunteers in there handing out water. FEMA don't hand out water. They contract for water. It's up to the locals to do that in the National Guard. But you're on restricted terrain. It's different.
Well, let me bring you back to Louisiana. Could Louisiana survive another hurricane like Katrina without federal aid?
It would be hard. They would need help from other states. And we normally get help from Texas, because the way the storms come, they either come somewhere in our bound area or they go to Texas, and we help each other. So, but if it hit like it did in Hurricane Laura, I want to say it was in Lake Charles, then much of that Texas coast then become disruptive, and it's hard to get help in, so we get help from Arkansas. But the way the storms go, they go north. So it will be days, and I'm an advocate for don't wait to use federal troops to save lives. You didn't wait to send them to L.A. Don't wait to send them to... Remember that description I gave you? And that was the previous administration. But they drug ass for almost 2 weeks without sending federal troops. And the thing that saved a lot of lives was the volunteers. They got in and they gave people food and water. And that was appreciated. And they brought the helicopters, almost 30 volunteer helicopters.
Well, so Donald Trump is sending troops more quickly to places that he feels like sending them. He is saying the states can manage on their own without federal funding.
Yeah.
He's saying maybe FEMA isn't up to the job. You support all that? You think he's making the right moves?
No, I think he's totally wrong. He's transactional. He looks at it as a businessman. And if I give you the money, states, then y'all handle it yourself. And do I think over time, and I've explained that earlier, that states are depending on federal recovery money to rebuild their infrastructure. And we can't afford it because we got the frequency of storms, we got the power of storms, and it's putting a hell of a burden on the federal government. That being said, it just didn't start in Katrina. It goes back to 2004, and again, we were somewhere around the eve of an election, and we ended up with down the storm in Florida, I think it was Wilma, with the federal government saying, you know, if you bought a chainsaw, let us know and we'll pay you back. What the hell that's got to do with get you in the house?
Yeah.
Or if you bought a tarp, we'll pay you back. I had one order come down. I had just taken over as First Army commander. And it sounded like some intern out of the White House came up with this. They wanted me to have, I forget the number, several hundred troops. They wanted to put FEMA T-shirts on them and have them go knock on doors. I said, hell no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And I remember telling my boss, I said, well, and he said, Russ, that's a pretty hard no. I said, sir, we can't do that.
Why?
Send federal troops out in FEMA T-shirts. We can't do that.
Why?
And I knew it came out of one of these brainstorming out of White House bullshit because, again, we were on the eve of an election.
So why would it be so wrong?
We just don't do that. We got people to do that. In between the state, the federal government, and contractors to do that. I think if you put the whole burden on the state, the burden is going to be now to hire contractors to go out and do the review of a home that's been damaged. And can they do it? Yeah. I'm not sure it's going to be any cheaper other than having your FEMA Reserve Corps, because about a third of FEMA has been destroyed. Either people took early retirement or they've been fired because they didn't have their 2-year time in service.
Hi, it's Laura. Independent media is a collaborative project, and you play a critical part in it. This show is made possible by our viewers and listeners, not corporations or advertisers. So join our member supporter honor roll by going to lauraflanders.org/donate to contribute. That's lauraflanders.org/donate. And please stay kind, stay curious, and commit to supporting this no ads, no gimmicks, not all about profit show, again, or for the very first time. Thank you. So you're making me also think about the interests that a state government is beholden to.
Right.
And in this state, we may talk about no kings, but we also talk about oil as king.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to ask you about the role of corporations in this state in both participating in the climate change disaster and in suppressing perhaps some of the whistleblowing about that disaster.
Well, I'd like to walk into that because after a disaster, the rich get richer. And a lot of that's the corporations, because they get the super contract. I had a businessman tell me after Katrina, he came down with the Attorney General, and As I recall, both of them had pistols on. Didn't have a pistol. I had a pistol. And they said, General, we understand the mayor wants the Corps engineer to clean up the debris. I said, that's what I heard. He said, well, I want to do that job, this businessman. I said, well, I don't deal with contracts. I can't even talk with you about it. And that would go through the Corps. But they would make a presentation to the governor. And he said, well, I got her elected. I'm going to see her. And 2 days later, he got the contract to manage the debris. It's called disaster capitalism. And the outcome of it is the rich get richer and the poor get poor. But that's the system we got now. Could there be some efficiencies inside the state? Maybe. The states that received the most money from FEMA in recent years is Florida, Texas, and Louisiana. Those states have pretty well organized emergency operations centers, and they have big National Guards. That's going to help them a lot. Where the challenge is going to be on the backside in recovery, because each one of those people who lost their roof, they maybe have to be touched 2 or 3 times by somebody at the end of the day is not going to give them enough money to get back in the home. It very seldom happens, either because of your income or you got insurance. Now, another thing, Lauren, that's swirling out is the insurance industry is walking away from the high impact area. You may have seen in the precursor to the California storm. Anybody could have seen that thing with the amount of rain they had the previous year, that was a fly zone. They dropped thousands of people before the fire even hit. So if insurance companies could figure it out, how in the hell the municipalities can't figure it out?
Well, maybe one of the reasons is they're not getting accurate information, or maybe they're being told to ignore the information. What role are the oil and gas and petroleum industries, chemical companies, playing in this state right now?
Well, they demand big tax incentives to come here. And I keep telling the people in the legislature, we go down there every year and argue with them, they don't come here for tax breaks. They come here because of the river and weak environmental enforcement. That's why they come here. And we're a free work state. You don't have a bunch of union workers. They're not coming here for the tax incentive, but when the state gives them the tax incentives, our roads don't get done. We are last in transportation, last in healthcare, last in education. We may not be last in one area, thank God, the Mississippi, but we almost last in every measurable area because we give tax breaks to the big oil companies and petrochemical companies. Do they create jobs? Yes. But it comes as a risk because the more petrochemicals we get, the more greenhouse gas we create, and the hotter that the Gulf get, because we have become a sanctuary for LNG plant, liquefied natural gas plants, which is created from natural gas, but in order to transport it, they have to process it, and when they process it, it emits methane, and that's the #1 driver of global warming. So I don't use the word climate change here because it's identifying you by a political party. I do freely use the word global warming. It is an issue, and it's exacerbated because now the state of Louisiana is the biggest carbon emitter in the Western Hemisphere because of these LNG plants. And very little of that increased the economy in Louisiana because it's run from Wall Street. It's not run by, none of those company headquarters are in New Orleans.
Venture Global, not based here?
They got a little footprint, but the money, the decisions are made off investment teams out of Wall Street and maybe out of Houston. But we get no secondary impact. And most of the plants, 150 of them between here and Baton Rouge. Back in the day when we had working plantation, the plantation boss lived on the plantation. These guys live in the central business district in New Orleans. The kids go to private school. They're not breathing in the pollution. You with me? And when the storms come, they're far away at a second home in the North Carolina mountains or in Mississippi, or took a flight to Hawaii. They don't get the exposure. But our state, in a way, has sacrificed a lot for the rest of the country because we are a major oil and petrochemical producer. Under the Obama administration, they came up with this, let me see how to describe it without being vulgar, the chemical corridor. That was what that administration got. We're a Cancer Alley to the people who live here.
We spoke to a fisherman yesterday who talked about the building of LNG plants where he used to fish, where his indigenous people had their home, and how he had had to be moved several times. How common is that? And why are more licenses being given to these plants? Are they safe from sea level rise themselves?
No. Many of them are built right above sea level rise. When you look at the ones down in Cameron Parish, Hackberry and in Cameron, we've seen 20-foot tidal surge before. Those plants could fail because of storm surge. Now, did they put walls around them? Yes. But again, you build a 20-foot wall, a 22-foot surge come. And we don't know what would happen because that's a lot of explosive material. In the last storm that came through, they just released it in the air. And what's that word, the fancy word? Well, it's an act of God, force majeure. Well, there's nothing we could do about it, bro. We just let the stuff go in the air. But that come back to you in terms of next year hurricanes, because if Gulf is going to be warmer and the impact on the terrain, like the fishermen, they suffer because the big ships they bring in, they have to constantly patrol that area and keep it deep enough, and it disturbs the ecosystem where the crabs and the shrimp are. So the local people become a casualty of an LNG plant. Now, LNG started in America over some shit that most Americans, and I'll pick a scab here. I want to say it's 2014. You know who's in the White House? Good guy, good administration. They got convinced that it would help the U.S. economy if we sold oil and gas. Up to that point, we didn't sell oil and gas. So here you got the lion and the lamb laying together. And the oil and gas boys just weighed them into doing this, that it was going to help the economy. The people who put the first LNG plant in Louisiana came out of President Bush and President Obama administration. You go back and look at their damn names. They knew how to work the policy. They were politicians, linked up with some people off Wall Street. They got their money together, and we got our first LNG plant in Louisiana.
As I remember, under the Obama administration, it was a trade-off. We'll protect some land in Alaska, but we'll let you do this thing down in Louisiana.
When our last governor was running for office, we were going from Jindal to Governor Evans, who was a Democratic governor. I go to a Veterans Day speech just to show you how deep this thing is. And the guy called me. He was the intermediary for the guy running on the other side. I don't want to mention names because I don't want to get sued. They said, hey, we want you to run for governor. We don't want you to win, but we want you to take enough votes from. And oh, by the way, we're going to put you on the board of this LNG company at about $400,000 a year. You never have to work again. This is the influence that big oil and gas, they run things. Our democracy has been hijacked by the oil and gas industry. They get tax breaks. In Louisiana, you get 3 years if you drill a well without having to pay royalties. Texas give 2. But Texas don't give tax breaks if the school money got, Louisiana, we give it all. We give school, we give sheriff, we get parks and recreation. All of them get a piece of that tax, and they get the waiver. It's called industrial tax exemption. And they get it for 10 years. The average oil well maybe the last 3 or 4 years. So we get no money from it. So your poor parishes stay poor in North Louisiana, that in the Haynesville Shale that's continued to drill for natural gas, and that natural gas is shipped down to the coast and turned into LNG and shipped overseas. It doesn't have an economic impact other than it's creating global warming from the methane. Have I overcomplicated that, Annie?
Nope, that sounds crystal clear to me. They have an impact in government. They also have an impact in our academy and intelligence. There was something that happened recently at Tulane. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Tulane is kind of like Louisiana Harvard. Prestigious private university, has a decent endowment, not like Harvard, but decent. And for decades, they've run a center there called the Tulane Environmental Law Clinic. And the Tulane Environmental Law Clinic focus on giving counsel sometime to local communities that are told, hey, they're going to build a plant next road over. And the people are going into a hearing, and they'll help the people prepare on with a good review, and they have environmental scientists in there that say this is the impact this could have on your health,
right,
and the impact it could have on the ecosystem, etc. And over time, that law clinic, and I've been to court with them, they would have the students defend the people. In this court I went to in New Iberia, I remember it so well. It was a permit to put a storage well inside a salt cavern, Lake Panua. Now, what scares the hell out of me about Lake Panua is it had been a freshwater lake, and 7 years ago, Texaco tried the same thing and imploded the salt cavern, and it turned into a saltwater lake. So here we are coming out of Atlanta Gas, I think the name of it was, water come store stuff in the lake. And we said, no, that's not a good idea. So they're poor people. That's one of the conditions. They deal with impoverished things. It's not like a company could call the Tulane Law Center and say, hey, we want you. No, they help people. And the young lawyers get experience. So I'm sitting there in the court, and the first thing I noticed was the judge yelled at everybody, take your hats off. So I dropped my hat to the ground, and then the lawyers with the $2,000 suits walked in. Hey, Judge! And then they were all nitty-gritty with the judge. But also sat over there was the Louisiana people from LDEQ. The people that's supposed to be protecting the people are sitting with the company from Atlanta that want to do the drilling. You got that? And here sat one of our lawyers from Tulane with a young lady that isn't a lawyer yet, but almost. And the judge opened the court. He mentioned all the protocols. And for nearly 2 hours, that young lady, she was there with, I'm going to mention the name, but y'all clear if you want to leave this in there. Lisa Jordan, who is a badass lawyer that worked in the Tulane Law Clinic. And She laid out a presentation. She had slides. She had charts. She had history. And she wore those $2,000 lawyer ass out. And they were appealing to the judge based on their relationship. But judge, you know, this is a good company. And sat there next to the judge is who the state pays through tax money to support them, is state lawyers arguing on the side of the company.
From the
now, the state agency is supposed to be protecting the people.
DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality.
Right. And over here sat a Tulane volunteer lawyer defending the people.
So?
Fast forward. It happened with the Governor Foster. He got irritated because that law clinic would go out and help, and he would get the boys up on the fourth floor come tell him, hey, you know, that law clinic stopped us putting a plant in or an expansion. You need to get rid of that. So there was an effort back under Governor Foster. God bless his soul, he's gone now. But the idea was, how do we close that clinic? It's a private institution. So he kind of poked at it. But then this year, again, Tulane is private. They do take what we call TOPS money. You go there with a state scholarship. So they do intake some money from the state, but by and large, it's an independent private university. But the president came to the Capitol this year with a request. It's inside the city. It's landlocked. And this university has an opportunity to go back to an old Katrina name, you remember, Charity Hospital, and rebuild it. But they need some state funds to do that. So, he came to the Capitol on Tulane Day, which all the universities have a day at the Capitol. And I'm told, third hand, the way the conversation went, hey, there's some people who want to talk to you. And he was called in and said, hey, if you want state money, you got to do something with that law clinic. And I don't have the quite phrases, but shortly thereafter, the law clinic came under heavy review by the leadership. And the president was going through a review of what we should keep, what we should shed ourselves going into this new economy.
The president of Tulane.
Yeah. And I'm told the only review that's still being made is whether the law clinic should exist. And they can't put any reports out because prior to his meeting at the Capitol and being told, go do something with that clinic, we had a report come out by Dr. Kimberly Terrell that had done a health and economic study in Kansas Alley. And in essence, it kind of explained that the people that live here don't benefit from the jobs here.
This is a largely African-American population.
Right. Somebody's over 50% in some of the parishes. But they don't benefit from the middle-class jobs that always come that are promised, even though they have equal education. But they're overrepresented in the health issue with health issues. And that had gotten published in the National Journal. And that report came out. And don't you know, people like the various chemical associations saw that report. Because you will not get a state worker to say Kansas Alley. You will not hear one of our elected officials use the word Kansas Alley. They will not use that word. And some of them will argue that there's no such thing as Kansas Alley because they said, look at the Tulane, at the Tumor Registry, which is run by another university, the flagship university. And the Tumor Registry was created and funded through legislation by the chemical industry to track tumors. So we walked that back. This thing has been going on a couple of decades now. And another one of the things happened after Katrina, and around that time, we ended up with a cancer research center in New Orleans. But the tumor registry, they just collect data from clinics and hospitals on what are cancer tumors. And then they report that to the State Board of Health, the State Health Department. So we went to the tumor registry and said, we want to see the data on St. John Parish. They said, well, we can't tell you that. So then we went to the legislature and we did a House resolution for them to release that data on St. James and St. John Parish. And this was kind of around the COVID was just getting kicked in. Guess what we found out? It's a higher rate of cancer there. Their argument was we cannot release tumor data because we would violate the people HIPAA. Can you believe that bullshit?
That medical privacy law.
Right. So your job is to track the cancer, but you can't tell the people.
So much of what you're saying, General, speaks to what's been happening at the local level that looks an awful lot like what we are hearing about now coming as directive from the federal government.
Absolutely.
What do you think is the relationship of those two dynamics? What is that dynamic in your view?
We're in what we call regulatory capture, where the people being regulated, run by big corporations like Koch brothers, if I pronounce them right, and political action like ALEC that pass these things.
The Legislative Exchange Council that puts forward regressive, mostly reactionary, conservative legislation.
They come and they'll hit one state and they say, hey, look, they did it. Let's do it over here. To a point where when I first moved here, we weren't testing for mercury anymore. Hello. And we're surrounded with it in the river parishes coming off of some of the plant. We weren't testing for lead. When Governor Jindal got replaced, well, right before he left, I'm going to correct it, he did hire some mercury testers because the EPA was starting to come after the state for not testing enough. And then when Governor Evans came, he had to hire 30-some people to go out and test water. And his first emergency he dealt with was the water system in St. Joe, Louisiana, that failed. And he had some emergency money and put $10 million in there to replace the water system in St. Joe. So we go from one incident to another where the impact of industry didn't have a big impact on St. Joe. It just wasn't a well-maintained water system. We've got 1,200 water systems in Louisiana, and over 400 of them are at risk. We've got communities where you were yesterday, they're drinking brown water. It looked like tea.
We saw it. We wrote in it. Are you saying that, I'm hearing you say that Louisiana is captured. Are you saying the country is captured?
Oh, hell yeah.
And what difference does Donald Trump's administration make? First off, are you saying the country is captured?
Yeah, our country has been captured by the fossil fuel industry. They run everything. Have you ever watched that movie Landman? That's some great one-liners in it. And it's no bullshit. They run stuff.
So what difference does Trump make to that?
He's a cheerleader for them because it's about making money. It's about being energy independent he's talking about. We produced more fuel in the last 4 years prior to him coming into office than we've ever produced before. We were not in an energy emergency. We've never produced this amount of fuel before. And some of that's perpetuated by what was going on in Russia and Ukraine. We've been producing the hell out of fuel and shipping it overseas. So this idea about we want to be energy independent, they're all full of shit when they say that. Do we still import certain fuels? Yes, we do. Because it's more productive for them to turn it into car gas than some of the other heavy fuels we got. But one of the biggest refineries in America now is in Texas, owned by the Saudis. We let that shit happen. Why did we let the Saudis own a refinery in Texas? Hello. Why do the Chinese own the biggest pig company in America? Who did that shit? Go back and see what administration they're going to surprise the hell out of you when that happened. So they have regulatory capture of both parties, in my estimation.
So what difference does Donald Trump make to this situation?
If there was any perception that he was using the laws in the Environmental Protection Agency to protect people, it's over. Because he's basically telling the plants, and he's told the EPA and giving them guidance, stop checking the plants. Let them do what they want to do. And that's scary as hell, because we had seen a reduction in our carbon footprint in the last 5 or 6 years, if I recall right, the number of years. We're going to lose all that, because the people in Washington that sat on K Street say, hey, the Chinese, they put more out than us, so we shouldn't have to be in the controls. Look at what China's doing. They don't care. Why should we care? It's all about the moolah. And these people control the politicians through the donations. Go look at Senate donations and see where they're coming from. And look, I drive a car that uses fuel. I'm not stupid. I'm not going to protest it. I'm not going to use fuel again and not be able to take care of my horse or take care of my family. I'm not stupid. All we were saying in the organization I created, the GreenArmy, let's find solutions for pollution. Yeah. And we were driving carbon rate down. And doing all right. It didn't make much of a difference in the bottom line to the companies. But now he's telling the EPA, you don't have to go out and check all these power plants.
So if I'm hearing you right, it sounds to me like you're saying he's kind of like putting lighter fluid on an already existing crisis.
We got a crisis, global warming. It's an impact. And as I said earlier, the destruction that's coming from the increase in fires, floods, and hurricanes and tornadoes, and the scientists say it's related to global warming, the heating of the earth. And what he said to the companies, go do what you want. And that's scary as hell. And oh, by the way, you don't have to worry about all that PFAS in the water. Anyhow, just let them drink it. And then you go pay for that, where at? In the hospital, in public health.
You've described a situation of corporate capture at the local level, at the national level. What difference does the Donald Trump administration make to that picture?
Well, first of all, when President Trump went in, he declared an energy emergency when we didn't have one. It said, drill, baby, drill. Well, we're not doing a whole lot of drilling because the lift price of oil in America is higher than it is in Saudi Arabia and other places. And most of our coastal land was drilled 60, 70 years ago. So there is much drilling that can still happen in the Gulf, if I may use that term and not be politically correct.
Leave it open.
Leave it open, the way you want to go. And he's a cheerleader for drill, baby, drill. So when you come in with let's drill, baby, drill, and declare an energy emergency when there isn't one, it's an open invitation to go drill wherever you want. You want to go drill in national parks, go do it. You want to go to Alaska, go drill. So he's been a cheerleader for more drilling and more fossil fuel exploration. At the same time, they have taken action to suppress what we had started in the way of renewable energy. Wind, the president said something about the wind farms affecting the birds. And I mean, it's just, he's got no sound bites in his head, and he don't think renewable energy is good. And he's got apprehensions about electric cars. We still got to get the electricity from some source, and they're talking about eliminating the deduction on electric cars, which I think at a point in time they need to be competitive with every other car. But that's what previous administrations have put in, but they put that on the chopping block as a way to save money. But I think the people that are in these industries, they have a seat at the table. When he was running for office, there was like a $10,000 social event to get in. It was more than that if you wanted to have a picture with him. And I don't know the multiples because I wasn't there, but I did get it on good order that that industry was a big supporter of President Trump. So as they've been with every president, they work both parties. Whoever's in there, they're getting to them. And it's what we call regulatory capture. The people being regulated, they got the last vote on legislation.
Do you worry about our democracy?
I do worry about our democracy. I worry about our democracy because for a little less than 250 years, it has survived based around our Constitution that the purpose of government is to serve the people. And I see a switch here where the purpose of government is to serve a business. And I think it's Franklin that said, it's not the best, but it's best in the rest of the forms of government, a democracy. The counter to democracy when it was formed 250 years ago was a monarchy run by a king. That when he saw the words of the Declaration of Independence, he asked the people of England to pray that the words of the Declaration of Independence, what's this about free? Free to live where you want, do what you want, marry who you want. We knew it would be the end of his form of government, King George III. The most powerful document I think we've ever created, Declaration of Independence. Because it gives people the idea of freedom, even though that document was signed. And for over 150 years, we had a major part of the population that weren't free, to include women. And I think when we use the word freedom, we understand if you're poor, you're not free. You don't select what hospital you go to. You don't really elect where you live. You don't get to pick the school your kids go to. So while the democracy has a great promise, it's very vulnerable because it can be taken over by because people sometimes say, well, and you've heard people in the White House say, well, if Kim Jong-un says something, all his people clap. And they like that. But what is the GDP of the people, or the standard of living of people in Korea, in North Korea? That when the president says something, everybody need to listen. Well, that's not the basis of our democracy, but a democracy is very vulnerable because the true believers and who think they keep the democracy can come up with some crazy stuff sometimes that don't make sense. And it's not practical. We could take a small segment of the population and have everybody bow down to it. And then we try to pass laws to enforce it. And we can't get the laws passed in the legislature, so we get executive orders that are easily wiped out by the next administration who said, no, we don't want to be that. You might say that word progressive. We don't want to be that progressive. And then you get a segment of the population that like this strongman mentality. When they say something, that's what we're going to do. You know, we're going to open all public land. We're going to sell them too. Why we need all that public land? Well, all that was done with a purpose to save the land for the people. Oh, why do we need parks? We want to close the parks. I mean, this is ridiculous. But on the other hand, what we've got to watch when we look at the two major parties, you can't be a Puritan and say, well, we're going to make the laws so this less than 1% of the population can do something. Because the majority of the population don't go with that shit. You with me? And that's the weakness of a democracy. So they have a tendency to lean toward people who are lean more authoritarian in their resolve and challenge our government. Now, we got 3 branches of government, but 2 of them are captured now. Well, all 3 are. The executive branch is got a single mind about things. The legislative branch is majority following what the White House said, and the Supreme Court is captured. Now we're talking about yesterday in the Supreme Court sending people to third countries that they didn't come from. I mean, countries that have different religion, different laws, and doing it with impunity. And they're proud of it. This is what happened when the last administration, I tried to encourage them, as I said earlier, let's not just talk about climate change. Let's focus on the industry and finding solutions for pollution. They wouldn't buy it because that would anger their donors because they take money from the fossil fuel industry too. But democracies, I deal with a project now in Haiti, and people are not impressed with democracy. They've had democracy for longer than we have.
So democracy is vulnerable.
It's vulnerable. And it's easy to be transferred. We see some places in Eastern Europe where you had people had very liberal rules on immigration are now changing.
Yeah.
Because the flaunt the words is changing our culture, is changing our people. We're the only country in the world that accepts everybody. You don't go to China and see a bunch of people from Africa walking around.
That was our great strength.
Right, that's our strength. That's the strength of our democracy. We're able to pull everybody in, and we end up with a total imagination, I call it, to do stuff like create Disney World, like create all these images you see pop on TV that inspire children to be innovative. That's what this big mixing bowl of a population create. And we could be creating the solutions we need to defeat pollution by continuing to bring the best minds, but yet we got a executive order said we're not going to let students in from other countries.
So on that, you have dedicated decades of your life to service, 37 in the military, and since with the GreenArmy.
Yeah.
Why do you do that? If you feel like this capture, if you feel like it's almost, in the hands already of the corporations, why do you still commit? And what's your message to people who want to think about what they can do in this moment?
Well, I've been blessed. 37 years, 3 months, and 3 days in the Army. I still have a comfortable retirement until they figure a way to take that out because I speak bad of the king. And people have warned me about that. But I think I'm still in bounds. And there are a lot of people that are retired that have a lot of knowledge and can be active in the community. And I tell them, what are you volunteering in? Or what are you engaged in? Or are you in politics? If all you're doing between breakfast and lunch is figure out where you're going to lunch, man, there's not much left. But you can make a difference in your community. But I just ran into one in my own community. We've got a woodland we're trying to save And a lot of the people in this upscale subdivision won't talk because they're still in business. They sell insurance or they sell cars.
So you still believe we can make the changes we need?
We got to. We don't have an option. We've got to save our democracy. We've got to save what brought us here for 250 years to be the leading economic power in the world. And to lead the world in research and in finding solutions to things. We can't afford not to do it if we're going to maintain our standard of living and maintain our democracy. Because you cannot get enamored with the fact that the White House will deploy troops in a state without talking to the governor. That cannot be normal. It's not necessarily against the law, but it's not normal. But it gives echoes of slipping toward something that Viktor Orban would do. We don't do that.
President of Hungary.
Right. We don't do that. We don't suppress our universities. Orban did that. We don't suppress our press and speak daily about how bad the press is. People lose confidence in expressing their First Amendment because they're scared they might be hurt in their business or in their comfortable lifestyle. But we owe a lot to the people who stood up with Washington. They weren't properly trained, they weren't properly equipped, but they fought for a word called freedom, and we take our freedom too lightly. And 20% of Washington's army were slaves. They fought for a promise of freedom that didn't see for another 150 years. And as a result of that movement caused women the right to vote. And when our soldiers went to World War I, the Harlem Hellfighters, General Pershing got a note from the Congress. So the Congress is not always right. They told Pershing, don't let them black soldiers fight, because if they fight, they're going to want to come back and want social justice. They're going to want to vote. So Pershing said, okay. So he called the French general and said, can they fight with you? We had American soldiers in World War I fight in French uniform. And I think I might have been a colonel in the Army before I knew that, because that information was suppressed. Can you believe that?
Is there anything you wouldn't do in the Army today?
I would not shoot citizens on the street because there was an order to shoot them in the leg. I would not do that. I'd protect my troops. I'd protect federal buildings. But I would not raise arms against our citizens. I think once we cross that line, it's going to be hard to come back. And I think what we see going on in California now is a precursor to set the conditions in the American people mind that we would have soldiers deployed to Chicago, Dallas, New York, Seattle, all the big blue cities. And I'm sorry for might have missed one, Boston, and they would be there to help deportation. And they've said it out loud. The idea of allowing the elimination of habeas corpus and allowing soldiers under the Insurrection Act to be able to arrest citizens, waiving the Posse Comitatus Act, by setting up this scenario that the nation's under attack. Well, Los Angeles wasn't under attack. They had riots. We can't go down that slippery slope and allow this government and this president to start deploying troops on the street to arrest people. We don't do that in America. It's not only not normal, it's against our Constitution. And the more we allow just a little slip of it to happen, it set the condition for it to happen. So democracies are very vulnerable. By design, the majority wins most of the time. But they're vulnerable. and we got to fight to keep it. If we're not willing to fight to keep it, we are going to be a big disappointment to our ancestors who got their heads beat in for the right to vote, who got their heads beat in for the right to walk in the front of a restaurant, who got their heads beat in to sit anywhere they wanted on the bus. We're going to be a big disappointment. And I hope the young people in America get off the AZZ and get engaged, get involved, and the retirees get engaged.
Thank you, sir.
We good?
We're good.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to the full conversation with General Russel Honoré, the retired lieutenant general who led the federal response to Katrina and now heads the GreenArmy, a grassroots environmental alliance. And stay tuned for the podcast release of our special report, Louisiana Survived Katrina, Will It Survive the Petrochemical Industry, that takes you deeper into the stories of the frontline communities fighting back. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters. Please join our members now by making a one-time donation or make it monthly. Go to patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. And that's also where you'll find more information on this conversation in the episode notes. That's patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. And thanks again to all our member supporters.